We're told Donald Trump came home from Europe feeling pretty good until his eldest son began raining on his parade. Donald Trump Jr. tweeted 4 pages of emails describing how a meeting with a Russian lawyer who promised incriminating information on Hillary Clinton came to be. The meeting was facilitated by a Rob Goldstone, it's a publicist with ties to the Trump family. In the initial email sent in June of last year, Goldstone writes, "This is obviously very high level and sensitive information, but it's part of Russia and its government's support for Mr. Trump." In response, the young Trump wrote, "If that's what you say, I love it, especially later in the summer." The meeting, as you know, eventually took place at Trump Tower and included Donald Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and then campaign chair Paul Manafort. Joining me now to discuss these latest developments and America's G20 hangovers, Harvard Kennedy School professor and former ambassador to NATO and former Undersecretary of State Nicholas Burns. Ambassador, it's great to see you.
Thanks, Jim.
I know you're a diplomat, not a criminal lawyer, so let me say that up front. If this is not proof of collusion, it is at least proof of a willingness to collude, is it not?
Well, here's what it is. If you're asked to take a meeting with a lawyer representing the Russian government, and that's in the emails that Trump released today, it is unpatriotic to take that meeting. It's wrong to work with the Russian government, our most dangerous adversary in the world against an American presidential candidate. I'm not a lawyer. It's potentially illegal. As you know, under American law, you cannot solicit donations from foreigners. You can't solicit material aid. So the question will be on the legal thing for Robert Mueller, the special counsel, and for Congress, does this constitute collusion? But it's wrong. It's not right for an American citizen to do this.
You know, if Republicans historically, I would argue, have been even heavier on the anti-Russia train in this country,
yes,
why have they been so quiet, with some notable exceptions, about these things? And other than the cybersecurity unit, where they all were mocking the president, is their response been so muted?
We're beginning to see a big pushback from Republicans. I testified 2 weeks ago before the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. This is the committee that interviewed Director Comey. They wanted me to talk about Russia's cyber attack in our election and what they should do about it. And I was really heartened, Jim, by the fact in that entire 2.5-hour testimony, only 2 Republicans kind of took me on because I was saying we had to sanction Russia. And most of the senior Republicans are behind a bill to sanction Russia over the interference in our election. I think that bill has to pass now, given today's revelations.
Is anybody, by speaking of Congress, we know the president has his commission that's looking into voter fraud, which most people say doesn't exist. Is any branch of government working to prevent what happened in 2016 and 2018?
Unfortunately not. What President Trump should be doing is working with state and local governments to strengthen our ability to withstand a cyber attack, whether it's from the Russian government or the North Koreans. We know they have that capacity. And that hasn't happened because President Trump is in denial about whether Russia hacked.
Can we go back before G20 seems like it happened a century ago because of these emails? The G19, as many people are calling. Chris Ullman, who no one ever heard of outside of Australia, of course, did that amazing 2 minutes and 18 seconds. He's from the Australian Broadcasting Company. In part, it said, our president, United States president, has no desire, no capacity to lead the world. Are those words stronger than they deserve to be?
They're accurate. You know, Jim, as you know, I've worked for both Republicans and Democrats in the White House. And so this is not a partisan statement. This was a disastrous summit for the United States. 20 major economies in the world. We were at 19-1, isolated on climate change, isolated on trade, isolated on immigration, isolated on refugees. And preceding that, President Trump spent most of his time criticizing the European Union and NATO. He's not leading. He's not leading with any degree of intelligence or optimism in the way that Reagan would have led or Bill Clinton would have led.
Ullman also raised an interesting point, I thought, that when the president knew that he was going to be the outlier on climate change, and apparently wasn't troubled about it, saying, you know, essentially I'm siding with ordinary Americans rather than those who care about a global community, he should have immediately come in with some sort of resolution on North Korea, which other nations were expecting and were ready to vote for, so that he could leave with a unanimous victory on something that does matter to the American people. Why didn't that materialize?
It would have been an easy win for him because the Europeans are not going to turn down the effort to try to sanction North Korea.
So why didn't he do it?
You know, I think there's this deep ideological division in the administration, and the Bannon wing is back. And it seems to be winning. The president gave a big speech in Warsaw, which was a dark speech about his concept of the West, which is not multi-ethnic and multi-religious.
Well, you know, speaking of that speech, it wasn't just Bannon. A lot of conservatives said it was the best speech that this president has delivered. Here's a little piece, if you missed it, the key piece of the president's speech in Warsaw. Here it is.
The fundamental question of our time is whether the West has the will to survive. Do we have the confidence in our values to defend them at any cost? Do we have enough respect for our citizens to protect our borders? Do we have the desire and the courage to preserve our civilization in the face of those who would subvert and destroy it?
What's wrong with that?
That speech was given to the most right-wing government in Europe, which is in Poland, to a crowd of people supporting that party. It's anti-immigrant. It's anti-Muslim, and those are code words in that speech, that the West is really white and Christian. This speech was not a good speech for an American president to give.
Speaking of international relations, which we are, let's talk about the president's treatment of his key diplomat, the Secretary of State, who he seems to undermine at every turn. If you take away the fact that Rex Tillerson, was actually in the room with him when he met with Putin, every other incident, whether it was the situation with the Saudis in Qatar, whether it's Ivanka Trump taking the seat at the G20, whether it's Jared Kushner as the de facto Secretary of State in the Middle East and China and other places, whether it's not allowing him to hire his own staff or fill key positions. What's going on here? And should Tillerson just continue to take it or say to the president, if you continue this behavior, I'll go back to the dreaded private sector?
Every prior president for whom I worked wanted to build up their Secretary of State because you need that person to have credibility in the world stage. You need Putin and Xi Jinping to take that person seriously. If Ivanka Trump sits in for the president between Xi Jinping and Theresa May, what's the message about Secretary Tillerson and Jim?
What is the message?
The message is that he's not as important as the president's daughter in the president's eyes in terms of his ability to sit at the table and represent the United States.
So why does the president want to undercut him? Is it a conscious decision, or is it just one that he trusts his inner circle more than he trusts a new kid on the block, Rex Tillerson?
The president doesn't know how to manage his own cabinet, doesn't know how to build up other people beyond the Trump family circle, and this is a real problem for us because Mattis and Secretary Jim Mattis and Tillerson and General McMaster, the NSC advisor, they're the rational, relatively experienced, very experienced, centrist wing of this administration.
Can you still say that today? You may, most everybody who has experience like yours, even if they're not Trump supporters, said it on the day that each of those three men were nominated. I don't hear people saying it that much months and months later.
I still think it's true because this administration is utterly divided on every major foreign policy issue, and those three represent conservatism, a center-right position, but not a know-nothing isolationist position. That's the Bannon wing, and that Bannon wing is powerful. You saw that in the Warsaw speech.
Larry Summers said in an op-ed in the Washington Post the other day, you probably saw the single greatest threat to national security in this country is the conduct of the President of the United States. Do you agree with that, too?
I think his conduct is unbecoming. It's like nothing we've seen in our lifetime from an American president on the international stage.
Okay, so he calls you in tomorrow and says, give me advice, former ambassador, he being Donald Trump. Give him 15 seconds of advice.
Sanction Russia, right? Do that right now. Show Putin there's a price to be paid for interfering in our elections. Be respectful of the NATO allies, of Angela Merkel. You'll need them down the line. And don't be too soft on the Chinese. You're putting too much money on the Chinese solving North Korea. They're not going to solve it.
Think any of those things are going to happen?
No.
Nicholas Burns, good to see you, Ambassador.
Thank you very much,
Thank you
Jim.
so much for your time.